Recording. Recording it here. All right. So welcome to I don't even know what week this is. Week number 3. The week 3 workshop call where we're going to go into Lightroom Classic and talk about your questions, specific questions, as well as my general kind of approach and workflow to Lightroom, and also just give an overview for anyone who's still new to it. I think it's always a good refresher to kind of understand what it does. And specifically, we're talking about Lightroom Classic. So that's different than Lightroom. They used to call it Lightroom CC or Lightroom Mobile. That's a different type of interface that matches up 100% with the mobile version. Lightroom Classic has a few more different options specifically within kind of like what's called the library function. So it really functions as a database and organization system, in addition to a raw editor. So that's kind of the differences there. Sorry for my dog barking at whatever neighbors or whatever. Um, so I will share my screen. I know I feel a little out of breath, but okay. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's Henry barking up a storm. All right. So first, we'll just go over the different panels. So they have all these different panels here. These are the options for the panels. Library, develop. They have like map, book, slideshow, and all that other stuff. Actually, don't know why I didn't turn it off. You can right click and just turn off the stuff you don't use. I pretty much don't use any of them other than these 3. So library, develop, and print. So library is basically the database. So basically the way that Lightroom works is if you haven't used Lightroom Classic basically creates kind of like a map of where all your files are. So the Lightroom catalog is really just metadata that says this file is stored here and here and the instructions on how we want to show it edited. It doesn't actually mess with the file itself. It's called a non-destructive editing software. So everything is working through the internal previews that Lightroom generates, and it messes with that and exports the raw from the preview. It's never touching the actual file, as opposed to, say, Photoshop, which actually manipulates the file, which is called a destructive editing software. So the power that Lightroom has, as far as for me as a a wedding and portrait photographer, is that it allows me to organize everything, cull through photos. Culling, if you don't know what culling is, that's kind of like selecting the images that you're going to edit or deliver or put it in a gallery. And that all happens within the library module. The library module is where you sort things, you can rate it. So there's stars, flags, all that good stuff. And I'll go over different shortcuts for the library module, but then there's also the develop module, which is where you kind of like edit the photos and whatnot. So this is where you're going to be able to do all your raw editing and all that good stuff. And then I also use the print module from time to time because I have a printer at home that you can print photos, and you can do different types of layouts and stuff like that. So if you have different size options, I probably won't go into this one just because it's a little bit a whole different workflow. You need different type of hardware and all that good stuff. Let's see. Okay, so for library module, there are a lot of shortcuts that I like to use. So this is for you, John, like that a lot of people don't know about. So first off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is how you star them. So and plus or minus is how you make it bigger or smaller. I actually didn't know how to do this until my niece accidentally pressed the plus or minus button. I used to just use this little slider at the bottom here to change it, and then she was like pressing the buttons. I'm like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So if you didn't know that, that's something I didn't know for a long time. But say if you wanted to do 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then 6 through 9 are colors. So you have 6 is red, 7 is yellow, 8 is green, 9 is blue. And then if you press the same one again, it will take it out. And these, you can use these for anything though. So they're all personal based systems. I actually don't know why I have these in green, but generally what my system is 1 star is for an edited photo. 3 stars is for it goes on a blog, and 5 stars is on my portfolio. That's just my personal system. Red usually means that it is a photo that needs to have Photoshop done to it, like I need to clean up something. And I don't really use the other colors too much. What I actually allow the colors to be used for is I use a program called Aftershoot, which is an AI culling software that will flag everything based on selects, duplicates, blank eyes, blurry photos, and I let it use the colors because I don't like it to touch the rating. So that's how I use it. But you can, some people say like, blue is for Instagram, red is for social, like your blog. Like you can come up with different strategies for yourself. So that's how I do that. Another cool thing is quick collections. So there is something up here called the quick collection that basically takes photos and kind of puts them in like a temporary folder. And the way that you do that is you press the B shortcut. So if you press B and say like, oh, I want to put together a few photos, B, B, and then you go here. Now you have like a little kind of like folder that doesn't actually exist anywhere, but just within Lightroom. So I do this a lot for when I make my Instagram carousels. I just choose like how many photos I think, and I go into here, and then I narrow them down to 10 that go into the slides. So if you're coming up with a short gallery or using a blog, this is a great place to put it first. And then you can always just Control A and create a collection. So if you don't know what a collection is like a digital folder within Lightroom itself. So you have your actual folders within Finder or Windows Explorer. Collections are like little folders that exist only within Lightroom, nowhere else. So you can use it for blogs. You can use it for coming up with your portfolio. Like here, this is a portfolio that I made for Fujifilm. I also use it to create like my reviews on YouTube. These are how I'm gathering them. So you can create collection sets, which are like different collections all together. And there's also ways to make a what's called a smart collection. And a smart collection allows you to basically use different metadata within the actual files to create auto-populate a folder. So I do it so like, oh, if I want to get every single JPEG that's from the GFX from this certain date on, it puts it all in there, and it's just always going to ever populate. So one that I like to use a lot is my X100V JPEG one. So it just populates all the photos that I have from this camera into JPEGs, because usually that's when I shoot personal photos is with JPEG. So I just have them all here. But you can do this with whatever, like if you want to see photos that are just from portraits, you do have to be diligent about creating keywords within your photos, but this is a place where you can add keywords. So if you, every single time you shoot a portrait, you write portrait, and then you can create a smart collection that populates just the portraits if you want to. So that's kind of another thing. So in the library mode, you also have the histogram available. You have like quick edits here. So if you want to take these 3 photos and just bump down the exposure just a little bit, you can do it here. This is like for quick spot checking stuff. So you have all those available. You can also blanket add a preset to everything. So you can just throw it on there and it just already changes the preset. It's not something I would recommend to edit like a whole session with, but if there's like a whole bunch of photos that like they're all just a little bit off, this is a great way to do that. This is also the way that I blanket add noise reduction. So like if I go through and I sort it by ISO, then I can just go like 1600 and anything on, then I could just Control A and then add my preset for noise reduction. That's what I can do. So those are just some ideas, but basically the library mode allows you to manipulate all the metadata and look at all this stuff. So another thing that I also like to tell people is that you can study yourself. So for example, if I want to see, these are all my best photos, I'm curious like what the breakdown of the focal length is. So you can literally just go in here and just sort it by focal length, and I can see that a majority of my photos that I really like were taken with the 16. Next up is the 56, and so on. So one thing that I like to recommend to people is if you are trying to figure out what lenses to buy next, or if I only can bring 2 lenses, which one should I bring? This is a great, like, very methodical approach to understanding, if you choose all your favorite photos or choose all the photos that you delivered from a shoot, you can use this metadata as a way for you to understand that. Or for example, of like, what am I going to do about high ISO? I don't know. You could just look at your ISO, like, do I even actually ever shoot past that ISO? I don't know. Like, these are all things that you can understand about yourself, because sometimes people worry about, like, oh, I don't know if this camera will do well over ISO 1600. Like, hopefully this doesn't make my computer crash, but like, I can show you that I barely shoot, like on the XT3, I barely shoot over, let's see, most of my photos are 3200. Everything else is less than 1,000 photos. So it just lets you kind of understand like where you're actually shooting at. Most of my photos are shot at 160. So it's like, it's kind of one of those things where a lot of people will worry about the what if, when you can actually look at what is actually happening on your shoots. There's a lot of data within here. So a lot of people sleep on like the library module, but this metadata filter is really, really useful when you're coming up with things that are representative of your business, or if you're trying to make a business purchase and you want to know which is going to be the most bang for your buck. You can study how your previous behaviors were. So yeah, I kind of went on a tangent just because I went to B for a quick collection. But B, another thing that you can do is control apostrophe or command apostrophe is to create a virtual copy. So when you create a virtual the heck is that? That I was not supposed to do. But basically, a virtual copy is another like imaginary version of this photo. So you can get this one and you can edit it in color if you wanted to. And then now you have 2 different versions of the same photo. With only one actual local file on your computer. So I usually make virtual copies to either, if I'm trying to experiment with a color versus black and white, or I also have a lot of virtual copies for square crops. So when I actually put it to Instagram, I don't have to mess with the crop of the original delivered photo. I just create a virtual copy and I crop that one. So if I wanted to like just crop this one, and for shortcuts, John, that was R. If you press R, you go straight into crop mode, straight from any type of panel that you're in. You could just press R and you'll go straight there. And then G is this mode where you see is the grid mode, where you see all the different little files. And if you press E, that's loop view in library mode, which is like when you can look at it close up. And then D goes to the develop panel. So you're always really going between E, G, D, like all the time. And if you're in loop view and you're like, I want to crop this, just press R, and then you're straight into the crop mode. So little things like that. I forgot what those shortcuts are because I use them so much. But yeah, so those are a few library things. Something if you have like a lot of photos that you want to put underneath each other. So for example, let's see, where did I shoot that? Where's that? Okay. So if you press S, or if you do Control, I think it's Control S. Is it? Or no, yeah. Nope. Forgot what it is. But there is a shortcut for it. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. Because I don't usually. Oh, Control G. Okay. Basically like group. So group photos into stack. If you press Control G, you can envelop all these photos into one stack, and then if you press S, it condenses it down. So there's 21 photos underneath here, but if I expand it out, so it's like if you know all these photos are related to one photo and you don't want to look at all of them, you can group it into a stack. This is great for bokeh panoramas or bracketed exposure. So if you shoot like overexposed, underexposed, and you just want to condense them all to one, that's something you could do here. And you can just have it available, or if you want to delete it later, you can. Let's see. If you, I think a few other shortcuts that are useful within, I can actually do it on a real shoot. Sorted. So if we go here, so if you press caps lock, you can create an auto advance in the library mode. So the shortcut for flagging something is a P is to pick. So this little flag up here or here. U is unpick. X is reject. So when it's rejected, it'll go grayed out like that. If you press caps lock, so I'm going to press caps lock here. If I press P, it auto advances. So you can just, this is a quick way to go through your photos and, oh, I don't like that one. I don't know. This one. I don't know if you see how that's working, but when you get into a flow, it's easier to be able to cull through photos very quickly if you have that auto advance on. Let's see. Yeah, so PXU, those are culling. And then if you have caps lock, that's auto advance. I think those are most of the shortcuts that I use specifically for the library mode. If there's any questions that you have specifically about the library mode, I probably know the answer, but it's a matter of I'm not sure what you guys don't know. And then let's get into some editing stuff. Let's see. Or maybe not this one. Okay. All right. So for actual editing, the best way that I like to recommend people to learn how to edit is to just like start playing around with like every single slider and just like see what it does. Like put it to the extremes and just see like what it's doing to the photo. Like that's pretty much how you learn. So exposure is like general brightness or exposure, like what you would do. Like if you have an overexposed photo, you'd bring it down, or underexposed photo, you'd bring it up. Contrast is really going to be changing the difference between black and white, like how stark the contrast is. So really high contrast versus low. Highlights is only going to pull down the brightest parts. Another way you can think about it too is you'll see this histogram here is changing the different values. So if I pull the highlights down, it's only focusing on this area. So you can do this a lot. And there's also like the secret function of like you can grab here and pull it down. I just don't think is as intuitive, but it's something that a lot of people don't know. You can grab the whites, bring it down here. You can grab the shadows, bring it down or bring it up. You may notice that all these things are shining blue and red. So you can see that blue, or you can see that there's also red. That's the J shortcut. If you press J, it turns off the highlight and shadow clipping. So if I turn it off, you won't really see it, but I can turn it on and off to show where there's clipping. And clipping is basically when anything is pure black or pure white and you have loss of data in the file. So you can turn it off like that. Another kind of unknown thing is if you press Alt on a Windows or Option on a Mac, it'll bring up kind of like a secondary view of almost every single slider. So if I hold it down, it shows you a guide of like where the highlights are clipping, as well as I guess just only the highlights. So anything that's overexposed. And then if you do like shadows, it'll show you like where the shadows are clipping. And then highlights, it'll do the same. So it's always one of those things where you'll see different functions. The most useful part is in the sharpening, which I can get to. But basically, this basic panel is where you do your most of your general tone and color. So your heavy color grading as far as like your white balance. So you fix your exposure, you fix your white balance here. You can probably bring down the highlights a little bit, increase the contrast. That's kind of like how this panel works. Texture is very is going to be within like the little parts of the skin. Like if you raise that all the way up, you can see the skin get very a little bit crunchy. And then clarity is going to be more mid-tone contrast, so it's going to be more of the general texture of everything, so hair and all that good stuff. And then texture, and it can get bad really quick. So if you see going clarity all the way to plus 100 is something I don't recommend. And then dehaze is specifically to reduce kind of like hazy, low contrast effects. So in this photo, shooting into a flare, if you do negative dehaze, it brings back, oh, not negative, positive dehaze, it brings back the contrast so it looks as if it wasn't as hazy before. If you do backslash, it goes between before and after. So I don't know if you know about that. Let's see. Whoa, what happened there? Let's see. So that, and then you can also customize your develop panel to change the order of everything. Basically, I put mine into the specific order that I actually edit stuff. Color grading actually should not be there. It should be here. So you can change the order. If you only use, the tone curve in detail, then you can just put it at the top. If you press Alt or Option and you click this little arrow here, you can turn on solo mode, which basically only lets one panel be open at a time. This is very helpful if you have a small monitor and you don't want a lot of stuff to be open. And then you Alt click or Option click again, and then you can have multiple things open at the same time. There's little quirks like that are in Lightroom. And basically, if you don't know what the histogram is yet, basically, the left part is the blacks, like the 0 values at the black, and then all the way to 255 is the white. And then basically every single pixel when the photo is attributed a certain brightness level, and that's what that distribution is here. So if you have mostly bright photos, it's all going to be on the other side, right? Or mostly dark, it's going to be on the other side on this side. And that's what this is. And then the tone curve also follows the same thing. So the tone curve, basically this part here is going to correspond to the black portion. And then this part's going to be the white. So then if you specifically, hold on, let me fix the exposure a little bit here so you can see it a little bit differently. And then I am get readies when I throw it off to you, but I'm just going to show a little bit. So if, for example, if you wanted to just lift only the black point, you can do that right here, and then it kind of makes it more matte. Or if you wanted to just put only the highlights down or the whites down, you can bring that down too. The most simplest thing that most people do that has like the biggest effect is just create an S curve, which is basically bringing up the highlights a little bit, bringing down the whites, bringing down the shadows a little bit, and then you can, however much you want it to be like more matte, you can bring up the shadow or the black point. That was a very heavy. This doesn't look that great because it was very heavy, and I actually don't edit the tone curve every single time that I edit. So that's something that I will let Iram talk about for a little bit. Like if you can spend like 5 or 10 minutes just showing how you manipulate the tone curve, because I think you actually edit the tone curve on your photos. I always have it baked into my preset, which I will show you after Iram shares a little bit.
Sweet. Yeah. I think you have to unshare your screen and then okay, how do I do this? Lightroom Classic. Or I'll just do desktop. Cool. Can y'all see this?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. How do I move this? Okay, hold on. Cool. Okay, so kind of what Reggie said. So this would be, hold on, I'm just moving everything out of, there's like the panel. Oh, there. Okay, so this would be a done and edited photo for me. And you can see the tone curve and how I manipulate with it. So this would be right here. Oh, hold on. Right there would be unedited and there wouldn't be anything. So linear. And then once I get my tones, like all this thing right here, it would look like this without a tone curve. So this is tone curve linear. And then I turn it on. What I usually do is I create presets for my tone curves. Also, there's already presets in there for you to use. So you have your medium contrast. So just make the photo look like that. You have your strong contrast. So do you see how it changes the blacks and the whites and the midtones? So that's what that curve is doing. So we go back to linear. So if you want a more matted look, so you want this to go up, this would matte your blacks, and this would matte your whites or your highlights. Because if you think each quadrant is blacks, midtones, whites. So when you pull from here, you make all the highlights big in the midtones. And you pull down from here, you make all the blacks in the photo a little bit darker. So I never actually touch my contrast. It's always at 0. And I do most of it, most of the work here on my tone curves, just because I can get a better look than just a contrast. Contrast lighter to me, I think it just goes super matte or super black, depending on how you slide it. So with the tone curve, you get more kind of, you can customize it more, you can change it up a bit more. And I've created some curves that I like to use. So I have like a vibrant mood, which means you have a matted black right here, which creates that kind of, wonder if you can see it. It's slight, but you can see like this soft moody feel to it, with like the midpoint right in the middle, with this point right here underneath that gives it that matte look. And I'll show you what the difference is between the vibrant mood. So you have this S curve that leans more moody, and then you have this vibrant, what I call vibrant. And you can see the differences in what's happening there. And if you think moody photographers, the people that like get super, like it feels dark in their photos, this is all they do. I'll show you. They just go underneath everything and you get that feel right there. So that's how, when you go light and airy, you just put everything almost at the top. This is gonna look like really bad, but you just put everything almost at the top right there and gives you that feel, give you that little contrast. And this gives you a more light and airy feel to it, with it still having a little bit of contrast right there. So that's how the tone curve works. Just be careful when you, sometimes you'd like create something and you just double click a point. If you accidentally make a point, sometimes like you click here and do this, just double click on it and it deletes the point. So feel free, whatever style you're doing, just know when you go under the line, you're going moody and you're going matte. And when you go over the line, you're going bright, like there. So the way that I do it, vibrant mood, I go moody in some things and highlights are in the bright. So that's how you kind of play around with the tone curve. And this is the pure RGB tone curves, and there are like their own each section right here, like red, green, blues. And you can play around with that. Some people play around with it and it changes the color of your photos as well. It takes the reds and the greens and the blues in the photo and you can pull it in each way. Some people do this instead of the color wheels and it changes in a different direction than the color wheel. Yeah, so there's many ways. I usually just stick here and I don't do anything else. And a lot of my work is here and the HSL. So I'll let Reggie take that on. And I don't know how to unshare screen. There we go.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out though is that there are multiple ways to edit photos or multiple ways to do the same thing. For example, Iram said he does all his work in the tone curve and the HSL. I literally try to touch those two things as little as possible in my editing workflow, because I use mostly the basic adjustments here, and sometimes I may hit like the orange and red. That's it, like nothing else. But I think there's a difference because he's shooting more fashion and I'm doing weddings, so there's different methodologies for how people want to approach it. I can't imagine adjusting the tone curve for 1,000 photos like every single time. That would that would be a pain for me. So it's not one of those things. So there's different ways to do it. So let's go into talking a little bit more about consistency in photo editing. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is how to actually check consistency. There's some tricks that you can do within Lightroom to really look at your consistency between different photos that should look similar. So one thing that you can do is when you're editing the actual photo, there's this shortcut here at the bottom, Shift R, that can go into reference mode. And what it does is allows you to drag any photo into this side, and then you can have a photo on the other side, and you can edit to the look of another one. So even if you were in a different shoot and I wanted to edit to this photo and make sure that it kind of looked within the same type of contrast level, you can do that. So that's one thing. My actual workflow when editing, so you can actually see how I would actually edit a few photos, is if I had this one, I basically edit what I call is like my mood image. So I have like one image that's already edited here is this one. So I can literally just go into here, drop that right there, and then I can go to this photo and make it look kind of like similar. The first thing I would do is control or command click this photo, and then wait, hold on. So let's just say this one. So control and command click that one, and you would sync it. And basically, when you sync the photos together, you're basically taking all certain values and just syncing it over. So the ones that I select, all of them, and I unclick usually lens correction, crop, spot removal, and masking, and also typically transform. So you just sync it over there, and then I go to this photo, and then I can just drag this one into the reference mode, and then you could just basically adjust by eye and just get it pretty close. My screen's like a little off, so it's going to be not exact, but you just kind of get it in the ballpark, and then like I'm done. Like I made a consistent edit just by looking at one and copying the edits. And if you're shooting in manual, generally you don't have to do too much because not everything is shifting too much, and you're really just trying to match the white balance and exposure level between the two photos. That's pretty much how I edit consistently, is by using the reference mode, syncing over a photo that I already like, and then just making it sure it matches that. So you pick the anchor photos, the photos that you actually are showcasing online or whatever, like your favorite photos. And all the other photos that you're editing are more really just for the client. So if you're looking at kind of like a wedding type workflow where you're delivering hundreds of images, but there are really like 10 standout images, you really just want to edit around the looks of those 10 images and let everything just not be too much of a variance, if that makes sense. So that's how you keep those things consistent. Another way you can check consistency is N survey mode. So if you click this photo, and hopefully I have another one in the same folder. You can press N, and then you can have multiple photos within here that you look at. You can control or command click another one, add another one there, and then you can even go into um, other whatchamacallit folders if you wanted to put them all together and kind of look at it different weddings at the same time. So it's pretty cool to see as far as like um, for example, if I control click this folder, I can also add in other shoots and see how my portfolio. So this is really good for when you're looking at like little small sections of your portfolio to see how it's going to click through, and like, oh, I didn't like how that one kind of shifted in the temperature in my portfolio. So you can go back here and kind of put them together and kind of mix and match and all that good stuff. So this is in survey mode. Um, yeah. So then let's see. And then as far as like how to actually create a preset. Oh shoot, I think I edited this on accident. Oh no, it's fine. So I'll just show you kind of like what my presets are and how they're built. So my preset actually is like made to like only change things that I change all the time. So it does like -35 on the highlights, +40 in the shadows. It has my tone curve set. Oops. You'll notice that I have this like little red shift in the shadows. Um, it has all my HSL set to like the default settings as well as my sharpening settings. And the way that I came about this is I have a very, if you are engineers or kind of like more technical, this will be kind of funny to you, but I basically took all the photos that I really like how they looked, and I jotted down every single value in a spreadsheet and just came up with like the min or the max. So if I was always bringing down the highlights, I figured out what was the least amount of pull down that I would do. It was -35. What is the minimum amount of I pushed up the shadows? It was 40. So that's how I came up with it. So basically, it was like so that I didn't have to start from 0 to 40. It was just already at 40, then I can move it a little bit. And everything I do when I apply my preset, I just adjust the exposure, I warm up or cool it down. I adjust the tint a little bit. I might adjust the shadows just a tad, but then that was how quickly I edited. Like this is pretty much done for the most part. One other step I take is I go down to the detail because I have a Fujifilm camera, and then I'll adjust the masking of the thing to avoid the Lightroom worms or whatever. But this is pretty much my workflow. So if you're thinking that I have some extravagant workflow, it really is built all into the preset, unfortunately, and it's just because I did the tone curve once and I don't like recreating it all the time. So it's that's why I tell you guys that I'm not super good at the tone curve because I spent a lot of time experimenting with it one time and I just called it a day and stopped doing it. The only thing that I adjust within the tone curve is the black point sometimes. So the most right or leftmost point, I have and I don't even do it myself. So I have like a different type of fade level. So you can like make it super matted, or you can drop it all the way down. And then basically it's just changing how contrasty the blacks are. Can't really see it for some reason on this photo. I don't know why. It's not changing live. Maybe this photo. So if you can look in his suit, you can see that like it goes like really matte to like kind of get the contrast back to here where there's like a little bit of detail. And then if I wanted to, I could just drop it down to 0 and then it just looks like a normal type matte level. That's the only part of the tone curve I pretty much ever adjust between any photos. And what I do is one good consistency trick is to make sure you have the same black point amongst the whole photo set. So in this case, this one is at 14. But like for example, if I had it at here, which is 28, if I was supposed to edit another photo that was like black and white, I would also make sure that the black and white photo also has a value of 28. so that it creates this cohesive look between the two photos. Because when you have two photos that have the same black point, it creates this visual consistency that it's not really perceptible to the eye as far as like what your brain is thinking, but like it makes it look more similar when you're going through between, versus like, for example, if I just dropped the contrast to there with the black point at 0, this one looks very more matted versus this one. So it's very important that you have a consistent black point across, if you're creating presets for your photos, that you understand where the different, what black point each preset is at, so that you can have a more consistent look across them. Obviously, my workflow is more for volume editing, like weddings. So if you have a different type of workflow, or someone has a different type of workflow for fashion or portraits or one-off pictures, it's definitely going to be different. This is just kind of how I use it. John talked about what wanted to ask about like the color grading, and I actually don't use this too much, but the way that it basically works is basically your midtones, your shadows, and your highlights have different kind of colors that you could add. Generally, for example, like one popular thing is having the highlights be kind of like more in the orange and the shadows go more in the like teal. It's very easy to like get heavy-handed with this though, so that's the one thing that I try not to do too much. And then I don't even know how that affected it, to be honest. So it kind of like cooled down the shadows a little bit, but that tends to yeah, you can use a color calibration tool, but it's not designed for that specifically. I think a lot of people use color calibration because it has the same effect, but color calibration has been defined by Lightroom to be used to calibrate different sensors and camera color sciences to match other ones. So you're literally calibrating it, because a lot of people will say like, oh, you can use this one to like change all that stuff. I think it's an interesting use of the tool, but I don't use it because that's not what it's designed for. Um, this color grading basically took over the split toning. So it used to be split toning, which basically you can add a tonality to different tone levels within. It used to be just between shadows and highlights. Now you have mid-tone control as well. So that's something that they added. Um, what else? So I think I'll just run through if you, does anybody have any, if you have questions as I'm going through this, just ask questions. But there are these photos that I picked specifically are just different lighting conditions that I edit through. And I also wanted to make one comment on what Ivan was mentioning about light and airy and moody and all that stuff. Is there is a way to edit moody, there is a way to edit light and airy, but there's also a factor within the lighting itself. So this photo is tending to light and airy and it's not even edited. This is a moodier photo, it's not even edited. So you have to understand that the lighting conditions actually play an important role into creating the mood, not just the edit. So if you have a photo and you're like, it's not looking like my favorite photographer's photo, you'll have to make sure that, are you using the same type of lighting as your favorite photographer? Are you using the same type of settings that they apply to that lighting condition? Because it's totally different. So I use the same preset for every single lighting condition, which I think, I don't know if Braxton's still on the call, but Braxton was saying like, oh, the lighting conditions are totally off. So I can't use a preset. What I do is my preset is flexible. So it's more of a, it's not a one click fix it. It's like I add the preset. Oh, it looks pretty cool and dark. So I'll bring it up. Now warm it up, bring up the shadows a little bit, maybe add some contrast. That's good. And then I'll go into this one. I add my color preset again. It's this way. If I wanted it to look light and airy, I could, but that's not how I like to edit my photos. So bring in the dehaze, bring in some contrast, warm it up. Probably too much. I feel like the reds are a little too much, so I might bring that down. And let's see. Bring some of this orange down. And a lot of when you're editing, it's like going between different. You're bouncing back between, like, you increase the exposure, your contrast went down a little bit, so you increase the contrast, then it changes it, and you might bring up your shadow. So don't feel like you have to hit it correctly right every time. Um, and then, for example, this photo, this is something that I think a lot of people like to learn about as like a cool trick. So I think John was talking about, like, they have new features within Lightroom, and I used to teach this edit a certain way, and now it's totally different because now they have these new like AI features. So what you can do is you can, I'm gonna add my preset, and I'm gonna just edit just for the skin tone of the couple first. So basically, I just increase exposure, increase the shadows a little bit, added some warmth, maybe bring down the tint on the skin just a little bit. And then now they have these cool like AI things where you can just like select the sky, and they'll just do its a little calculation. And now you could just like bring it down. Because before I used to have, like, I have to do all these crazy masking techniques to get it down, but now you can just bring that down a little bit. And then if I wanted to change that again, but that's the difference between this and this. Obviously, it's going to be a specific type of look, and it's not super realistic. So definitely, one rule of thumb I have is if you're really into an edit, um, edit to your heart's desire, go to sleep, wake up, and dial it back 20%. Probably will look better than if you just edited the way that you initially wanted to, because we can get a little bit heavy-handed, especially when you're looking at a photo for a long time. Um, and then here's just kind of how I do my black and white photos. And again, like when I actually apply my preset, it doesn't always look great yet. So I have my own specific adjustments that I know that I need to do for a specific type of photos. It's just a matter of my preset gets it kind of close, and everything else really requires you to understand what all the sliders in Lightroom do. So I might bring this down a little bit. So yeah, so this is kind of how I edit, and um, there's a lot of people who, not in the community in itself, but like from my audience, that say like, oh, how do you not over edit a photo, or like how do you not spend too much time editing a photo? And I think it's really understanding what the actual expectations of the clients are, because you can get really down into the weeds for a specific photo that they probably don't even care about. It's just a deliverable. So it's really giving yourself either a time limit for when you're editing photos. This is specifically for like wedding photography and all that stuff. You can, I always try to spend at most like 1 minute, if not less, per photo, just so that I can keep running through it. And I also like to sync my settings and my edits across as many photos as I can. So, uh, so these are called but not edited, right? Oh yeah. So I can show you something here. Let's see. Okay. So for example, if I have all these photos, right? I usually stick to a specific lighting scenario, and then I sync all the edits from there. So these photos right here are all the same lighting. So what I'm gonna do is, I already developed this photo. This one is kind of dialed in. So I shift click here, sync, and I basically check all and then take off anything that's localized. So masking, spot removal, crop, lens correction, I usually just, I think I have that on. And then transform I take off. That's like the distortion. And I sync all of these photos together. And then I go into my reference. And then what I'm going to do is I just go to the first photo, and then I just make the match. Like, I've already done all the brain work saying like that first photo that I synced from is probably the one that I like the best. So now I'm just like going in here and adjusting to see if it's close. And then once I'm good with that one, I just move on to the next photo. And I'm only adjusting for like the deltas between the photos. And I'm not trying to do anything creatively different than the other one unless you feel like there's a need to do it. For me, this is kind of like on my just get it, just deliver the photos type mood. Like, and then there. Let's see, this one's pretty close. Sometimes you might not even need to do it at all. So then now I can go in here, and if I really wanted to check like if they all look kind of cohesive, this one looks a little bit too bright. So I could go in back here and just bring it down just a little bit. And now we have all these photos are done and edited within, I want to say that was like less than 2 or 3 minutes. So you don't have to spend a lot of time if you've already done it. And this is, again, this is only one specific way to approach it. But I do this same thing for family portraits, for events, or anything like that. I just try to, when I shoot, I try to keep things within one certain lighting condition so that I don't have to do so much work afterwards. So you'll notice that these photos are all kind of grouped pretty. Wait, this is already cold? This does not look like it's cold. I don't know. Um, but when I shoot photos, I basically am. Oh, here's the rejected. Always sticking to like one certain lighting scenario, and then I shoot multiple versions, and then I kind of move on to another area, and then I shoot, and I move on to another area, then I shoot. But this allows me, because I'm keeping the lighting the same for each different scenario, I can just pick like, okay, for this scenario, I probably only have 1 or 2 good shots, and I just focus on just picking 2, because you could go down the process of like, okay, I have 40 photos, which ones are the best, and then you whittle them down. So you take away the ones like, okay, I don't like this one, so I'll take that away. I like to call in the positive direction, so you're picking what you want to edit, not removing what you don't. If that makes sense. So the easier way to call is to just pick the photos that are good. So if I go through here, and then I'm just calling this, I'm just looking through the ones that are actually good. So I might pick that one. And then, so from this section, I've had 25 photos, but I only picked 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm only gonna edit those 4, if that makes sense. Because there's a lot of people who don't, are like, I feel overwhelmed with the amount of photos that I take. Like, there is the option of like, yeah, don't overshoot, but there's also the other option of like, select just the best ones. And I think the one thing that's hard to do is when you start shooting, um, you don't know, like you're still calibrating your taste versus your clients. But like at this point for me, like when I've already worked through a whole bunch of clients already, I kind of know that my picks will be correct. And then what I do is in the worst case scenario, I do have every single raw photo backed up. So in case I deliver the photos, everything's said and done, they're like, oh shoot, do you have a photo from here? I still have it just in case I need to go pull it from the archives, just in case something went wrong. But at this point, I've only had one client in the past 3 years ask for a photo. Like, and it was because there was like this specific relative that passed away, and they didn't actually have a flattering photo, so they didn't make it into it, but they wanted anything. So that's something that happens sometimes. But yeah, this is pretty much. What else do I have? Export settings. Is there any specific tools that people were curious about that they wanted to see? I did see that Tasha was asking about double exposures. There is not a way to do double exposures within Lightroom, but there is a very easy way to go from Lightroom to Photoshop. So, for example, this photo is I don't know if it's a triple exposure or double exposure. HSL, yeah. 21 photos. Oh, it's because I think it was a carousel. The reason why my Lightroom is so slow is because I deleted all the previews and to save space, and now it's like trying to render them. This is going to be hard to show. But basically, maybe if I can put these in a collection. Oh, it's this one. And I think this one. I don't even know where the original photo is. But basically, for this photo, I took like a bokeh photo and then a silhouette. Oh, I think it's these two. I need to get out of here. Okay. There. So I edited these photos separately. And then what you can do is you can right click. I think it's open as layers in Photoshop. And this will actually have to share it within. Well, let's wait till my Photoshop opens up. Here we go. And it has like a seamless link between the two. So I think, I don't know if Lightroom Class or Lightroom non-classic has the Photoshop edit to Photoshop. I'm not sure. But when you do double exposures, there's not really a tried and true way other than to just try and layer different ones. Typically screen, lighten, or overlay is what people kind of go between. I want to say, I don't know which one to use for this one. Oh, not that one. It's probably screen. But that's how you kind of make it. And then what I did was I took this photo and then I brought it back into Lightroom and I re-edited it. But when you could press Control S on here, I'm not going to do it because it's going to mess up my catalog. It will actually go bring it back to Lightroom and save the Photoshop edited version right next to everything else. So that's a cool thing about, I don't know if that's available on Lightroom non-classic, but that's basically how you're able to do that. And you can also do other. Oh no, there's actually for like bokeh panoramas, you can do that within Lightroom now. Before you used to bring it into Photoshop too. And then I think Iron was talking about HSL. I can talk about it fairly quickly. Do people already know how to use the HSL panel or no? Show of thumbs up. Yeah, no. Not really. Okay. Well, I know you do. You know, Iram. But so HSL, I like to. There's two different things. So hue is gonna go between like different colors. So red you can bring toward kind of like the pink side or to the green side, and then orange will go. They basically all go that same direction. So green or blue. And then saturation is is basically how dense a color is. So like if you're gonna bring it all fully saturated or not. And then I like to call luminance as like the brightness of a color. So for example, green, I can bring it to a more darker, or I can bring it to more brighter. I don't think this is the exact scientific term like luminance, but for me it's like the what I call like the brightness or exposure of the color. So in this case, you could do that, or a lot of people like to grab the blue and like a photo with a sky in it and like drop it down. I tend to not do that, but that's what a lot of people do. So for example, I took this photo. You can grab the luminance of the blue and just bring it down and it changes the sky from like super bright to like super moody or whatever. Like that's kind of like how people use that. I tend to only use HSL just for skin. That's what I tend to use it for because I'm working with skin tones. So if there's too much red in somebody's skin that wasn't accurate to how I saw them in real life, I might adjust that just because my preset's a little bit heavier handed. But in general, if I'd like to open it up for questions if we have like a 25 minutes or so, if people have questions, or if you've been working on an edit and you're curious on like how to change something. Where is the chat? We had a worms issue. Let's see. You guys really want to see the worms? Okay. How
I
many?
have a
How?
question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So, as a Fuji shooter,
Mhm.
I always wondered, does shooting in so like I'll shoot if I'm shooting in color, I'm usually in pro neg.
Okay, yeah.
Does pro neg and then you putting a preset and working off of a preset, do they work hand in hand? And considering I'm shooting in raw, so it's kind of one of those things I'm trying to figure out. Like, are they complementary, or does the preset, once I attach the preset as my working point, does that kind of like erase what the internal camera setting will gives me that look, so to speak?
Totally,
Because it's
totally.
all in raw. I understand those simulations really only matter in JPEG, but
Hmm.
I'm trying to at least capture some of that essence within my raw edit. But
Totally.
am I losing that by slapping the preset on top of that?
The answer is it's a cop out answer. Is it depends. So
Okay.
here's the one thing is certain presets will just completely obliterate it, or you
Mm-hmm.
can have presets that actually work with it. So for example, my film simulation preset that I use currently actually matches really close to what my actual editing preset is in Lightroom now.
Okay.
And I've calibrated that personally just because I've done work to like make it look similar. Oh, this
Mm-hmm.
photo is on my Mac. Let me see. Trying to find a photo that I think would go. Okay, so this is my son. And this JPEG was shot with whatchamacallit, classic Chrome with all my adjustments on it or whatever. So if I go to the folder in my library, I can pull up the raw right next to it. I think it's this one. So B. This is where I love quick collections because I can just isolate stuff without having to look at everything else. Oops. Wait, what did I do here? Sorry. So I'll talk through it a little bit. So here is the JPEG, and then here is the actual photo that Lightroom sees it as. So
Mm-hmm.
it's it changes the colors a little bit. So you can pull up the profile. I don't know if you know how to do this. You can pull up the profiles that
Yeah.
Lightroom interpreted it to do
Mm-hmm.
here. And you can also, when you add a preset, it just depends on is it changing it or not.
Right.
Because some presets do. For example, when I put my normal color preset, it changes it to pro negative standard, but you can always change it back if you wanted to. It's just a matter of you have to be aware of what it's doing. And then you just adjust it from there. So the one that I have that really matches up is this Embarcadero preset actually matches up with my classic Chrome thing really well
Mm-hmm.
for certain lighting situations. But to answer your question, it's like it depends on like what preset are you using and do they change this and how heavy handed is it, if that makes sense. Because if you're trying to keep it true to your JPEG, the most that you're really going to do is just add this and then maybe adjust the contrast a little bit and
Mhm.
the white balance, and you might get it pretty close. It's not ever going to be 100% exact
Right.
though.
That makes sense.
Um, it sucks because the photo that I wanted to show was a JPEG, and let's see, which one is. So this is the raw right here, and this is the other one. So it's like it's kind of close, and it's not gonna like totally destroy it. It just depends on what you're trying to do. But like if I actually added my preset to it, my preset tends to be a little bit more lifted in the shadows. So then I'll have to like bring it down, and it's more on like the green orange side. So you'll see that if I compare these two again, this one's like more green. This is more like darker with red skin tones.
Yeah.
And I can obviously I can edit that more and fix that. But it's a matter of if you have something dialed in to your Fujifilm camera that you like, I would say it is work on taking the raw output of that and formulating your preset to look like that again, like or close to it. So that way you can shoot like that with your film recipe in there, and you're knowing that like okay, my exposure levels are going to get me close to how I wanted to edit it finally at the end. That's something that I've been doing now that I shoot in um, with my film simulation recipe now is I can get it pretty close. So I think one wedding that I did, I only recently started shooting weddings with my film sims on. Um, where is that? Was that San Francisco one? Yeah. So this wedding, like this specific photo here. Is this a JPEG? Yeah. So it's like this is what I actually saw in the camera with classic Chrome. And then this is my edit, and I like my edit better. So it's just a matter of like, you know what I mean, if you can recreate it. But it's this one you can definitely see that like my preset lifts the blacks. There is actually not a way to matte out your blacks in
Yeah.
in the Fujifilm camera other than
Mhm.
if you have like a Cinebloom filter or something like that. So it just depends, but it's one of those things where I was shooting and metering this thing knowing that like it's already pretty close to what I wanted it. It's like not drastically different. Um, but this particular wedding, I was like trying to shoot it to see if I could just show only JPEGs from the entire wedding. I was gonna say like, oh, I shot a wedding only in JPEG, and to show that it like looks okay. So that's why I shot both of these in JPEG, and I still have them saved. But do you have any follow up questions on that?
No, that pretty much yeah, you pretty much explained it. No, it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So it's one of those things too. Is like it would be cool if it saved everything. I know that Capture One can read what film simulation you used, but I still don't think it knows whether you did plus or minus, highlights. If you did
Right.
uh color chrome effects, like they don't have anything that actually does that. What I would recommend you can do is there's this software called Fuji X Raw Studio, which you literally hook up your camera with a USB, and you can take any raw photo that you've edited, or sorry, any raw photo that you've taken before on your computer, and you can load it in there, and it uses your camera's basically raw engine to edit it. And that's how you can reverse engineer like what a photo looks on your computer, and then you change all your film simulation profiles, and then you could match it up with something that you edit in raw, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So
Okay.
that's one thing that a lot of people don't know is you can basically create film simulation recipes on your computer and look at it at a big monitor. It's I made a YouTube video about it before, so I can send that afterwards. But yeah, that's something you can do if you're really ingrained in the film sim workflow. But I think the best way that I like to use it is just kind of pick the one that you like, adjust it to the point where like, hey, this kind of looks like how I want the photo to look like after it's edited, and it gives you a gauge for that. Because what it's going to at least help you understand is like, how are the shadows going to look with the type of contrast that I like? You know, like if I push toward the blue or the warms, what is that going to look like?
Yeah.
That's what it helps me to understand. Because in general, I'm still lighting people similarly, whether it's flat photo or not, but it just gives you an idea of like how hard you can push like the sense of like moodier photos, right? So
Cool. Appreciate it.
yep. So you can turn off the camera profile on a preset. Yeah. Yeah, those are all things you can do, but it's never gonna. Iram said you can add a camera profile to load on the import preset. You can do that, but it's never gonna know which one you actually shot with on Lightroom. So, for example, if you shot an Acros and Classic Chrome and you imported them, it's not gonna know which one is which. Capture One can supposedly, but I've never tried. And I think there was also a discussion before. People were asking like, "Oh, is Capture One really that much better?" Apparently, it is. Like the rendering is better, but it's a matter of like what do you work better with. I personally only edit in Lightroom for the longest time, so that's what I know how to use, and that's why I don't use Capture One. If you have it, oh yeah. So you want to know about Lightroom worms on Fuji files in Lightroom? Yes, I can. So let me find a good example. What would be a good example? What time is it? 15 minutes. Okay. This photo. So when people talk about Lightroom worms, what they're talking about is when you zoom into 100, you see these little artifacts here. If you zoom into like 400, you can really see them, but it's like, why would you zoom into 400? I don't know. But basically, why this happens is because Lightroom is designed for traditional sensors. So they're called Bayer sensors. They're basically randomized patterns of R, G, and B pixels within the sensor, whereas the X-trans files have it or oriented in a certain way where it will create these artifacts. Um, and basically every single type of Bayer filter, which is like Nikon, Sony, whatever, all those things, they have what's called an anti-aliasing filter. And what that does is it is created to avoid the moire effect. So if you've ever taken a photo of someone with like a checkered shirt, and you'll see these like little like weird designs that kind of pop up when it focuses in a certain way. Like I don't know if you ever did those like pictures in the 90s where there's like a pattern and you look at it and you cross your eyes and like something shows up. That's the moire effect. That's what that is. So the anti-aliasing filter is put in the camera to slightly blur the image to avoid that. But X-trans sensors do not have an anti-aliasing filter. So that's something a lot of people don't realize. So this detail slider is made to negate the effect of an anti-aliasing filter, and it's always set at default 25. But an X-trans sensor does not have an anti-aliasing filter, so it doesn't need this. So what you should really be doing is putting it at 0, and this will eliminate a lot of the worm effects. So, but basically, if I didn't have it, had it at 25, and I increase the sharpening, you're like, oh my gosh, look at all these worms, like these little weird things, right? These are what people call Fujifilm worms. And people used to say that, oh, what you should do is you should decrease the detail and bring down the amount. But that's actually the wrong thing, because the detail slider was made for a tool of anti-aliasing filter that we don't have in our Fujifilm camera. So the actual correct way to do it is to bring this down and bring it to like, say, like I usually hover between like 760 to like 90. So even if I max this out at 150 and detail at 0, it's not as pronounced. But if you did the opposite, you still can see it. So that's one thing. There was this guy who made an article and he would say he would promote this method, and I said it was wrong, and the internet tried to get mad at me, but I started being the guy that created the method that everyone uses now. So so you put that at 0 and say like 90, and then the last step of this is to use the masking tool. So what you do is press Alt or Option on a Mac, and then you grab this, and then you make sure that, so basically anything in white will be sharpened, anything in black will not be sharpened, and I just bring this back until the actual background is mostly in black. And then you can actually zoom in to here and just, you can bring back some texture in her face, and this basically gets rid of the worm problem. The only reason why the worm problem exists is because people don't zero this out. Because if you do this, then there's like random stuff that happens in her face. And if you see that, that's worms. That's Fujifilm worms. This is what they're talking about. So if you just drop that to 0, it goes away. You put it back at like 25, you can see it. But if you put it to 0, it's gone. And then you can mask it away, and that even makes it better. Does this help? Does that kind of help? The cool thing is Fujifilm files don't actually need to be sharpened at all, generally. The only reason why a sharpening panel exists in Lightroom is because of anti-aliasing filters within standard Bayer filters. I had to like geek out about this for like a long time because I was like, how do I get this to work without moving over to Capture One? And I figured it out based on understanding what this slider does. I had to like look up like coding documentation of when people used to code Lightroom to figure out like, what does this detail slider do? That's how I figured it out. Cool. Do you have any other questions on this, Tasha? What camera do you use? Oh yes. So my sharpening preset, literally right here, is a X-Trans thing, and it just automatically puts that in my preset. If you use a GFX camera, it actually is not a Bayer. It's not an X-Trans sensor, so you would have to. My GFX is this way, and then I have a non-Fujifilm one. If I use like somebody who shoots with a Sony or something, I gotta edit their files. I use this non-Fujifilm preset. But if you literally copy these settings right here, 90, 0.5, 0, 65, you add it on your photo, and then every time, if you want to just dial it in, you can always do the Alt thing and just double check. If you're shooting like a landscape photo, you can probably bring it down closer to 50. If you're shooting a very close-up photo of somebody that's smaller, like this, you may have to bring it higher up. Oh no, my computer. So you might have to bring it up to like here, like 80 something. If you're very high ISO, you tend to have to bring it to like 80, 85. That's the only thing I tend to change is the masking. I made a couple videos on it though, so you can check that out. That was the start of my YouTube career. Like as far as getting popularity was this sharpening thing. Awesome. So I know Braxton is on the call. I don't know if you want to let me know in the chat. Were you able to kind of get some stuff, or are you just passively watching? Because I know you wanted to learn more about consistency and editing, so I'm curious if Braxton had any questions. Alex is on here too. If you have any other questions, Gladys.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I'm gonna definitely go back and rewatch the recording and see if I can if I have any more if I have any questions for you afterwards.
Totally. Yeah. And like what you were saying before, as far as not having a preset that can really like tackle all the different situations for a specific wedding, I don't think any wedding photographer has that type of approach. I think most of the time, if they do, it's because they're trying to shoot under certain controlled lighting. But I would say my best advice to you is to actually just focus on different scenarios that you've been shooting in and edit those in chunks. And then what you do is, for example, like if I had this one, everything was in this hotel room first, and then we moved to the bride's hotel room. And then what you could do is once you finish editing one, you go into your reference panel. Hold on, I have to open and close this. So you go into your reference panel and just drop this one in here. And then before you start editing the next scene, you go in here and just make sure that it looks cohesive. It's not super like jarring to like one or to the other. You edit this other photo, and now once you're done with that one, you can just edit this chunk of photos. Does that make sense? That's generally how I work, and it makes it a little bit less overwhelming. And what you can do is when you have a lot of focus and inspiration and brain power, literally just focus on editing one photo from each lighting scenario. So I'll just edit this one, and then I'll edit, this one, and then you edit this one in this really terrible lighting, and then one from the ceremony, and then you go to this family portrait. If you just edit one photo from each lighting condition, and then you go to sleep, wake up, and the next time you feel like you're in the zone, you can just literally edit each chunk of photos knowing that it's going to be cohesive at the end, as long as you make sure to match each lighting scenario together in the beginning. Hopefully that makes sense. That's typically how I do it to manage difficult lighting situations between different settings. Is I focus on just making one photo from each lighting scenario cohesive. Then once I solve that problem, I can just go back to just editing in smaller chunks.
That makes sense. And so you basically just try to match skin tones as much as possible.
Yeah.
And that's what you kind of sole basis off of, like, because from the studio background I come from, you focus on not only just skin tones but the consistency of the color of the background. And so I don't know if that's something that I should be so obsessive with when it comes to wedding photography, or if I should be just solely obsessive with the skin tones and make sure the skin tones match and work it off of it based off of that.
Yeah, I would say the skin tones and the overall color temperature and contrast is what I would say. If you're trying to match every single part of every single day, it's gonna be terrible. The one thing that you have to just remember though is when there is a significant shift of color, for example here, the skin tone will not match because they're in like a backlit golden hour area, which will never match to, say, like a hotel room like this, right? It's never going to match. So you have to also know when to like try not to match it too much and just kind of go here and just see like, is it going to be like kind of close? Because like his skin is going to be a little bit different. There's going to be more red or whatever just based on the golden hour. But it's one of those things where I would say at some point this is where you kind of set your limits. Like on the day that you're doing like each little lighting scenario, spend as much time as you want, but once you actually go in to start editing the whole set, try not to stick to one photo for too long, because I promise you it's probably not that worth it. Like like if you wanted to fix like one photo for like 10 minutes, it's probably something that your client will just like pass through really quickly unless it's like the best photo, right? But when you're editing the best photos, that's typically on your first like teaser set or whatever. So if you have any specific photos that you're having trouble matching up, I'd be more than happy to, if you send me the raws in a Slack or like a download link from like a Dropbox or something that I can download. And if you wanted to see how I would match them up, that's something I'd be happy to like explore with you, especially if it's three different photos. It usually helps to edit three different photos. Like two photos together is hard to see, but if you had three different photos that you wanted to match up together from different lighting scenarios, I could probably show you how I would do them. It's going to be edited in my style, but you can at least see like to what degree I try to match certain things.
I'm definitely going to take you up for that. I have like 3 photos that I'm thinking of right now from my most recent wedding. And so I'm going to definitely reach out to you and we'll try to set something up.
For sure, definitely. And then if it's okay with you, I'm gonna record it and share it within the Slack just so other people can learn from how you manage like the different lighting.
Of course, yeah, that's okay with me.
Cool, sweet. All right, I think that brings us to the time. I don't think there's any other questions. Obviously, if you have any other Lightroom questions, like very specific things, feel free to ask. I tried to cover as much as I thought was relevant, but there's definitely a lot of things that you can do, and there's other people within the community. Like Iram's got a lot of he uses a lot of different tools that I don't. Like the adjustment brush, HSL, the tone curve, all that good stuff. So if there's a tool that you're looking for, just feel free to ask. Even if I can't help you on it, I probably know somebody who might like to use that tool. So just go ahead and ask. Thanks everyone for tuning in for this call, and I will see you next week. We're gonna start doing some stuff about niching down and figuring out our niche. So I think Tasha's really excited about that one, so she can kind of start doing all the other exercises, not having her niche kind of figured out. And then the week after that, Iram's actually going to be helping us do some kind of like brand copywriting, branding type stuff. So he leads workshops with photographers and other creatives about branding. So we're gonna kind of dive into that after we've figured out our niche. We can go into like some brand copywriting stuff, and then the week after that will be the week that we have Fred. Fred Ago is going to be guest speaking for our community about. I asked him to talk a little bit about like getting started within kind of like the fashion portrait, like music artist type space, and steps for you all to kind of who want to venture down that way as far as like commercial portraits and fashion portraits and all that good stuff. He's going to share some knowledge and expertise and his insights on all that good stuff. So, all right. So I will see you next week, and I'll see you on the Slack. All right. See you, everyone.